Hey, welcome back. In this video, we will be repotting this Japanese red pine on a concept bonsai pot that I made, which you can see here now. The first action will be to remove some sacrifice branches in this tree that will not be needed. This tree will not be styled now, but the presence of the sacrifice branches will make the job a bit more difficult. The pot was made with a concrete and part of it broke, and I reattached it with copper wire, as you can see, and it became quite interesting. This Japanese red pine comes from a bonsai nursery as pre-bonsai stock, grown from seed in bonsai substrate, has a fantastic nebare and excellent root system. And so really the job here is to remove the point of greatest limitation, which is the bottom. And as you will see a little bit on the sides, on the top, it was not necessary to remove anything, just rough up the surface to blend the new soil where needed. So far I have not had to cut any major roots, and as you can see I only use a chopstick. Now I am measuring to see what are the limitations sideways, and I will continue working on the roots to attack the points of greatest limitation that remain in this tree. At this point, I am using a pair of scissors to cut very neatly the roots that I want to remove, and this is performed on the bottom and on the sides as well. And these clean cuts are important to to foster the creation of new roots from the cut sides. The quality of the root system in this tree is exceptional for pre-bonsai, and that made the job a lot easier. Now I'm drilling holes for the galvanized steel wire to attach the tree into the pot, and in this case I just add general holes on each side, but in principle one can mark exactly when one needs to, where one needs to make the holes for the specific tree. In this case, because the root system was so compact, almost like the one that you would find in an established tree that was already in a bonsai pot, the strategy to tie it down is much easier. So I'm using 17 gauge galvanized steel wire because it doesn't stretch and it takes a lot longer to deteriorate. Now I am using long fiber sphagnum moss to cover the cavities and prevent soil from escaping. An alternative would be to hot glue drainage mesh on the inside, leaving a section, um, sort of a pocket to attach the living moss from the outside. I will also experiment in the future, perhaps, with those recipes of buttermilk with sphagnum instead of live sphagnum, as you will see. But for now, this is it. This is a view from the top, and now I am going to add substrate. This is the same substrate that I use on the interior. This is not there is no need for an aeration layer here. And this is 111 Shabazai, which is equivalent to Akadama, diatomaceous earth, and pumice. That the diatomaceous earth makes the roll of lava, and here I'm adding a mound in the center. Even though I don't have a cavity at the bottom of this root mass, it's fairly flat. Still, there are some indentations, so by building this mound, I can then place the tree and really um, um, cover all cavities inside. I'm now putting the tree, and I will make sure that there is full contact with the bottom layer of substrate. So I'm slightly moving it sideways and back and forth until I feel that there is full contact. Now because this root system is so compact, the strategy that I will use for attaching the wires is to put the bamboo stake, and I'm hammering it inside of the root system just so that you have an idea of how dense the root system is here. And the same will be done on the other side. The advantage of using bamboo stakes instead of going with wires across, uh, attaching around with the wires from the other side, is aesthetic primarily, but also functional in the sense that uh, the strongest attachment for the tree is when the wires are straight up from the hole on the container, and this exerts the strongest direct force on the wire, so there is no slack and the tree is absolutely immobile in the pot. I started to add substrate now, and if you see my right hand, I'm holding the sphagnum moss wall, and I can feel as the substrate starts to feel and reach the edge of the container. I'm using a chopstick again, and this is a directional chopstick like Ryan Neal uses. And depending the direction where the angle side of the chopstick is acting, I can direct the direction where the substrate is being moved onto. There are plenty of spaces to fill, and this is a part of the job that requires some attention to make sure that all pockets are filled. The next task is to remove the excess substrate so that there is a small uh, contour to the substrate and a little bit of a space on the edge with the container so that the water is drains in and not out of the container. I kept moss alive over winter in my cold greenhouse, and I will use it to cover the moss cavities on the container, and also I will use it to prepare um, top dressing for the tree. So the pieces that I use to cover the edges, I'm just removing the dirt and the extra layer of whatnot on the inside so that it's as thin but still keeping some integrity as a single patch uh, to put it over the sphagnum moss. As I mentioned earlier, another possibility would be to have a mesh, and then just as I'm attaching here, I would be attaching it on top of a mesh, or still to use the sphagnum, the live moss to create a moss milkshake with the buttermilk. There are plenty of recipes. I don't know how well this works, but I will probably give it a try because then I would only have to paint the existing sphagnum moss with this sticky mixture. You may notice I water the tree already, and this is for two reasons. One is because I stopped for a number of hours after chopsticking, and the second reason is that I'm tilting the pot to add the moss on the cavities, and if the substrate was dry, it would fall apart much easier. Now I will create top dressing, and what I use is a, a sieve, a standard bonsai soil sieve, the second um, spacing, or actually in this case is the largest spacing, yeah. And all this moss that I had kept over winter, I'm cutting all the green parts and discarding the rest, as you can see. I read in a book about moss gardening that the best way to propagate moss is to use green moss, moss that is fresh. But moss is not a, like a plant that has a root system and a vascular system. Any part of a moss creates, essentially reproduces and establishes itself. So all the green parts I'm removing, and then I will grate them to create the top dressing. There are different ways of creating top dressing. Ryan Neal grates sphagnum moss with dry live moss, 50% each, and you and stains the sphagnum moss with China ink to make it darker. I prefer to use 100% moss as shown here. Now I'm grating it, and this is because if you have enough moss, this is enough to cover it, and just it will establish itself much faster. To place the moss, the top dressing is simply a matter of spreading it on a very thin layer. As you can see, in some places you still see the substrate around, and this is live moss that will start reproducing and grabbing hold of the top layer of substrate and colonizing it. The advantages of using moss are several. It helps maintain the humidity of the soil. It helps roots colonize the top edge of the substrate that they would not otherwise, because of the substrate being loose and because of light. And it also helps maintain the integrity of the substrate so you don't lose it when you're watering your tree. This is the final result of today's work on this concept container with lateral aeration, covered with live moss, and we will see how this concept evolves in the future. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe, and until the next one, bye bye.